Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the Razer Huntsman Elite gaming keyboard from back in 2018. But it's back in our hands. This is their Opto-Mechanical Razer purple switched keyboard. Is it any good? Let's take a look. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at the Razer Huntsman Elite gaming keyboard. This was originally released back in the heady days of 2018. How the world was very different back then. And also the price was very different. This actually released in the UK market for somewhere in the region of about £200 to £230, which is a very, very long way off what you can pick it up for today. At the moment now, towards the end of July 2022, you can pick this up generally on offer for somewhere in the region of about £70 to £80, although quite often it is on amazon.co.uk for somewhere between the £100 and £120 mark. So essentially about £100 less than it was when it was released almost 5 years ago now. But what do you get for your money, and is it worth considering over other options such as things like the Corsair K70 V2 RGB? It's a very similar kind of design, but let's take a look at it today to see what it's all about. Now the first thing is going to be the big difference is the fact that this is using Opto-Mechanical switches. Now what I mean by that is they are mechanical feeling switches, so they've got that nice clicky indentation to them, so when you type in you get that tactile feedback. But rather than using a mechanical switch to actually register what key you're pressing, it actually uses a beam of light. Now that beam of light has a sensor, so if you imagine beam of light this side, sensor this side, beam of light goes through, makes a connection. It's very, very simple, very straightforward, and due to that fact these have actually got a keystroke length of somewhere in the region of 100 million key presses. Obviously we won't be testing that, but certainly they are at the moment actually kind of really rated for more than double what Cherry MXs are. So those are really good switches and they last for ages. This should be giving you effectively double the length. Now the switches themselves are very similar to those if you've ever used blue Cherry switches before. You've got that really kind of clicky tactile feedback to them. They do have a much lower actuation force, so these are around about 45 grams of actuation pressure, and they've got a key travel before actuation of 1.5 millimeters and a total travel of 3.5 millimeters. So again, very similar to what Cherry MX Blues would be like, albeit they don't have that mechanical switch. They have a Opto-Mechanical switch instead. Anyway, that's enough of an intro, let's take a look at this thing. So this is what the packaging comes through like. So you can see it's the Razer Huntsman Elite Opto-Mechanical Gaming Keyboard. I think we've said that numerous times already. It does come pre-installed with their purple switches. On the side of the box it talks about the packaging contents, what you get with it, and also the sizes and dimensions. I'll leave that on the screen for you now so you can take a close look and see if it's going to be too big or too small for your particular needs. On the back of the box it talks about the switches again, kind of like this is the highlight of this keyboard, to be completely honest with you. If you just changed out the switches for something like Cherry MX's, then this keyboard wouldn't quite have that appeal. I personally don't think, but let me know what you think in the comments section. But what it is about these switches, every single switch does actually have a stabilizing bar. So every single switch, every single key does have a stabilization bar, which is a very rare thing to see on a gaming keyboard. Generally, maybe things like your shift key, enter key, spacebar obviously, they would have a stabilizer because of the width of the key. You want to keep it stable. But in order to make the keys as responsive and as accurate as possible, Razer have gone and put stabilizers in every single switch, which I think is actually a really cool thing. And when you're using it, it does feel particularly stable. Something else you may have noticed actually on the box as well is the fact that there is a wrist rest included, which isn't anything groundbreaking by any means. Even some of the cheaper keyboards on the market do come with an integrated wrist rest. What makes this one slightly different is the fact that it is nicely padded, it is a leatherette construction with memory foam underneath, and also, bizarrely, it actually has addressable RGB lighting. So it actually has some pogo pin connectors on the front, so you can actually magnetically connect it to your keyboard, and it will take the lighting signal from the keyboard and pass it through into the wrist rest, which is a very unusual thing to see. So let's take a look at the keyboard and the wrist pad itself and see what it's actually all about. So as you can see, keyboard wise, this thing is a monster. It is really, really heavy. It is a metal and plastic construction, so the top deck is done in this really nice satin matte black finish, which I actually really appreciate. It does look very premium, but yeah, it definitely is quite weighty, so if you're not using it for gaming, then potentially you could use it as exercise equipment. Another key feature of why this keyboard is just a little bit different, and certainly is an upgrade over the previous Razer Huntsman keyboard, The reason why this is the Elite version, as it says on the box, is because we've got the addition of, obviously, like I said, the wrist pad, but also we've got some media controls on here, which, again, is nothing groundbreaking. A lot of manufacturers do it, and actually a lot of manufacturers do it particularly well. But in this particular instance, Razer have gone ahead and added 3 buttons at the top here. So this is for media playback, so you've got play and pause in the middle, and you've also got rewind and fast forward on the top there. Sadly, these particular buttons don't actually have any real illumination or pass-through, unlike the keycaps, so you can actually see what they are. So you do have to look on a certain angle to actually work out which one is which. Obviously, there's only 3 buttons, and kind of it does make sense. Middle one's play, pause, and the others are going, obviously, the other direction. So it kind of makes sense anyway. What is really cool is actually on the end here. So this is a volume wheel, or at least you'd think it is a volume wheel. It is actually a multi-function device, believe it or not. So you've got a center button, which you can press, and it's got a nice click to it, and that will actually mute or unmute music, or whatever's on the screen, or whatever's playing through your speakers, all that kind of stuff. And you can adjust the volume as you would normally with a kind of volume rocker or volume wheel. But you can actually pre-program this actually in the Razer Synapse software. You can make it do basically pretty much anything you want to. There's so many things you can choose. You can have it set for zoom in perhaps, or changing weapons in a game if you wanted to. Even in things like Adobe Premiere, you can get it to set certain points or to zoom in, zoom out, that kind of stuff. Super, super flexible. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's actually quite nice that you do have that flexibility, although the downside is you do have to install the Razer Synapse software. Installing the software is actually a pretty painless task, although personally for me, I don't really appreciate the software. I find it rather buggy and unintuitive. Again, this is the internet, so feel free to disagree with me in the comment section below. But in order to set up the software, it is actually very easy. You will need an internet connection when you first plug this in, bizarrely, which in the days of 2022 seems like a very odd thing to do, although most PCs now, I guess, are internet connected. But all you'll need to do is to plug in the 2 USB cables. Yep, that's right. Not 1, but 2 USB cables, which actually is quite odd if you think about it, being that this keyboard doesn't actually have any USB pass-through, which generally premium keyboards of this kind of price point, normally you'd find an additional USB connection somewhere to plug in maybe a headset, a gamepad, that kind of thing. But this is purely just for power, and is for power for the USB for actually powering the wrist pad and also the illumination, because it does draw a considerable amount of power. Obviously, one of them is just for data, for your keystrokes, etc., which you'd expect. And we've got a particularly good polling rate on here, so no lag or anything like that through those USB ports. The cable itself, nice and long, around about 2 meters, so very similar to the Corsair K70 if you've used one of those before. And it is all nicely braided, and it's quite a stiff cable as well, so depending on where you're putting it or cable managing, you may want to think about that in advance. Taking a look at the bottom of the keyboard, so we've got 6 rubber pads in pretty decent places, and actually does keep it really well in place on the desk. So even a relatively shiny surface like this, it does want to keep itself in place, which is awesome. And if you want to adjust the rake of the keyboard, so you want to angle it up a little bit more, which some people do, you've actually got feet built in with 2 levels on there. So you've got around about 5mm of height if you're with the first leg, and if you pull up the second one as well, it gives you somewhere in the region of about 8 to 10mm of extra distance. Not particularly high, not the highest I've seen before, but certainly will be fine. Most people will be absolutely fine with that. There are very, very small rubber feet on there as well. So obviously, because that is going to be raised up, most of that rubber is actually going to be pulled away from the desk. So you're not going to have quite such the stability, but still does seem to keep itself pretty well planted and doesn't want to move around. So looking at the deck itself, as I said, got this really nice metal top plate. It is super heavy. It really is a heavy keyboard. All the keys sound, how can I explain it? They sound kind of a little bit different. So because of the way they're sprung loaded and they're not a kind of true mechanical switch in what we're used to, there is an unusual sound to them. So if you go through, there isn't really, bizarrely, a uniform noise to it, which I was expecting. And actually, if I show you some footage I did a little bit earlier, I'll turn up the gain a little bit so you can hear it a little bit more accurately. Touching on the side of the switches, even though they are stabilized, the springs that are in there, when you first get it, you'll notice that there is definite individual resonance to the keys, so they don't all sound exactly the same. But let's listen to that now and see what you think. So there you can see that there are certainly some keys, for some reason, that do have somewhat more of a rebound or resonance to them. So they're not all particularly uniform, which, considering the price of it, I would have expected that, to be honest with you. But I guess that is the kind of nature of key switches these days. They are mass produced, so you do get some slight variances in them. When it comes to things like lubing them and all that kind of stuff, obviously, because they are using an electrical beam or a light beam, then kind of grease and all that kind of stuff, traditional lube is probably not a good idea for this. Looking at the keycaps are done in a really nice legend. It's not offensive, it's not gamery in any way, shape or form, just very neutral, very pleasant. And the actual design of this is very neutral and very pleasant. There isn't any kind of outrageous markings from branding, etc. And in fact, there isn't actually a Razer logo on the keyboard itself at all. The only thing you do have is obviously the keys and the lighting, which we'll take a look at shortly. If you want to take off the keycaps, it's very easy to do. They don't actually include a keycap puller, which I found a little bit unusual. But if you want to, they do pull off relatively easily, and that reveals these purple switches, so you can see how they work, and you can see the stabilizer bar. I've got loads of close-ups of this, so you can see how that works in practice. The actual movement of it, the actual kind of the mechanics of the whole thing, I really do like. And the fact that, again, there is a stabilizer on each key means that the keys are really good, and they don't want to wobble around, which is excellent. And even things like the spacebar does have a little bit of wiggle to it, but not a great deal. So if we look at the keyboard, let's take a look at the wrist rest, and as you can see, it's actually a really nice bit of kit. It's very much, rather than being an afterthought, it is kind of like an integral part of the unit. So you can see, first of all, got the Razer logo, which is embossed here, done, again, pretty neutrally. It isn't in any crazy colours. I would have hated to see that in their traditional bright green. I think that would have been an absolutely terrible thing to do. So going minimalist on there, I think really works well for the design. The leatherette is really nice and soft, and as you can see, even though today is a particularly humid day here in the United Kingdom, sweaty hands, sweaty palms, etc. And yeah, it doesn't appear to be making any marks on there, which is always a good sign. Easy to wipe clean though, obviously, if it does. It isn't going to escape Cheeto dust very easily. On this top section, we've got the pogo pins. So the pogo pins and this little receiver here just plug into the front, so it is magnetic, so it just attaches. And actually, even if you do move the keyboard a little bit, it does want to stay on. So if I drag it around, it takes a little bit of a dragging force to actually make it come off, so it's not too bad. Again, if you do want to detach it for some reason, maybe you're eating lunch at your desktop and the wrist pad's in the way and you can't fit your plate on your desk, then you can just move that out of the way if you wanted to. There are, again, another additional 6 rubber feet on there, so keeping this thing firmly planted in place wherever it is. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without that RGB lighting, which again, you've probably seen from some of the B-roll, but there is actually RGB lighting all the way around the outer edge. And that follows round through. It's actually all the way through inside as well. So even the bit you don't see does actually light up, which a bit pointless, but certainly is relatively a cool thing to do, that they've gone to that attention to detail. So yeah, just attach that on there. Happy days. The actual scroll wheel on the top here, I should say as well, there is a really nice kind of notch to that as well, which I probably didn't mention a little bit earlier on, but I just noticed then when I touched it that there is a very notchy feel to it, so that's nice. Some of the earlier reviews I saw of this, actually back in the early days of 2018, when I definitely couldn't afford this, and actually I still can't afford it. This is actually Ugly Bob's. He sent it to us kindly for us to unbox and take a look at before we send it back to him, so thank you very much, Bob, for that. You're going to love this, you really are. But that notchy feel is really nice. Some people said that there's a kind of like a plastic scratchy noise or feel to it, but I'm not getting that at all. So maybe they've improved the manufacturing process and remedied that. I only found it on maybe 2 videos, but yeah, certainly it does feel very premium. So now we've got it plugged in so you can see what it looks like a little bit better. So it's currently running through the Synapse software, which is on the PC behind me. Currently just set into the kind of uniform puke. And as you can see on the front there, we've got that bar lit up. So if we just take this off, it doesn't give any of that kind of USB nonsense, disconnect, reconnect, even though it is using a kind of USB connection to power it. So yeah, it's absolutely fine. Again, got that lighting strip along the bottom there. So if you don't want to use the wrist rest, you don't have to. Although, kind of, if you don't really want to use the wrist rest, you're probably better off just going for the regular Huntsman rather than the Huntsman Elite, because other than the media controls here, it is effectively the same keyboard, so you still get those really cool Opto-Mechanical switches, but you just don't get the media controls and you don't get the wrist pad, which, yeah, for the extra money, is it worth it? that's down to the individual. But yeah, the lighting is really nice, and you do have the kind of floating key type style, which we're all used to these days. The actual switches themselves are north illuminated, so they're not going to be kind of dazzling you. If you look at it from the back side, then it is considerably brighter, but from the front where you'd normally be looking at it, then it is rather nicely diffused, which yeah, some people do appreciate. I personally do. I don't like the glare of kind of naked LEDs unless they're done in a particular way. Anyway, I digress. So actually on the keyboard, if you press the function key, the light switch actually do functions, actually light up. So you can do things like you can turn on macro mode, so press F9 to turn on macro mode. You can press F10, turns on gaming mode, so basically locks out your Windows key, that kind of stuff. And you've got options there for lighting up and down, brightness. Sadly, there's no built-in controls on here to actually control RGB, which personally for me, I think I would prefer. Like I said earlier, I'm not a massive fan of the whole Razer Synapse software. Again, let me know in the comments what you think about it. I find it a little bit buggy and definitely not very intuitive. Although if you've used it for a considerable amount of time, then I guess it becomes second nature. But for me, swapping through various RGB softwares, MSI seem to do it the best as far as I'm concerned. Probably Asus Aurora is okay, but the software, yeah, a bit hit and miss. The Razer software, I think, tries to do a little bit too much and just a little bit too cluttered. But again, let me know what you think about that one in the comment section. Also, you can see now that there's lights here. So if you've got your scroll lock on or your number lock, you've got nice little white LEDs there. These LEDs cannot be changed, so they are a uniform color. Everything else on the keyboard in terms of colors you can change other than the mute key. So you've got the mute key, press that and it cycles between red, so you know it's muted, which is actually quite handy. And then it goes back to color change. Again, you can change all the colors in the Synapse software. There's various built-in modes. You've got the RGB stuff, the color fades going through the various color cycles. There's a fire one or flame one, so you can set like a flame effect. It's got a Chroma Studio, so you can go in there and basically make whatever you want. And you can actually layer effects on top of each other as well, which is kind of cool if you can be bothered to do it. Personally, I'd rather just have a couple of quick options and set it and be done with it. But overall, what do I think of this keyboard here now in July 2022 at its current asking price? So at the moment, Amazon.co.uk, we're looking at £120 as their normal selling price, roughly. On offer on Prime Day, I'm pretty sure it come down to somewhere around about 80, possibly even less than that. At those kind of price ranges, I think you get an awful lot of keyboard for your money. In terms of actual weight, yeah, you get a lot of it. For me personally, I think the Razer Synapse software is a thing which kind of kills it for me a little bit. But the actual keyboard itself, the key switches are phenomenal. Now, I was playing some games earlier, a little bit of Fortnite. These key switches do definitely give you the edge. Because they are optical rather than mechanical, there's no lag, there's no delay, and also between individual key presses, you don't wait for that kind of debounce thing. So the keyboard, most keyboards have got like a kind of a built-in delay, so they don't re-register the same click twice. Whereas this, because it's optical, it's literally a beam of light and it travels at the speed of light, so it is going to be inherently faster. And I did test this against another mechanical keyboard using Cherry MX Brown switches, and the difference is tangible. You definitely notice it. I thought it was a placebo effect, but no, it definitely does seem to be quicker. It seems more snappy, so if you're into your fast, twitchy shooters and you want accuracy, this is definitely worth a look. And actually, if you're just a typist, me personally, I'm not the most accurate of typist, so I do rely on the kind of the keyboard to be a little bit more forgiving. And actually, because of the kind of very low tactile force and also the very low actuation force, or distance rather, of 1.5 millimeters, even if you don't fully press the key, you'll find that it's going to register anyway, which for some people, if you're a little bit heavy-handed, could be a real pain in the backside. You may find things like the space key, because it's quite big, you might find accidental actuations because of actually how static or how kind of level the key is, whereas some keyboards that would flex a little bit if you actually kind of accidentally brushed over it with your palm, whereas this is going to register it. So there's pros and cons to it, but if you're after absolute accuracy, but you don't want to pay an absolute fortune that you would for a similar model to this, if you're going down the Asus ROG line with some of their optical switches, then yeah, I think this actually makes a ton of sense. Again, the Razer Synapse software being essentially a must is something which I think scores it a few less points, but in terms of actual physical quality, the build and the strength, the ruggedness, and of course the excellent wrist rest, I think this is an absolute bargain. But what I think isn't important, what you think is, so let me know in the comment section, and we'll see what you've all got to think about it. I think that's going to wrap this one up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.